is ContraZoom, where we go back and forth about film. I'm your host, Dakota Arsenault, and today's episode is presented by Aesthetic Magazine. On today's show, we are remembering Canada at War, in honor of Remembrance Day this November 11th, as we remember those that had fought and lost their lives starting in World War I and onwards. Today, we're going to look at a pair of films, both directed by Paul Gross, that deal with Canada in action. First, we have the World War I film Passchendaele, that takes place in 1917, and then Hyena Road, that takes place in Afghanistan sometime in the early 2010s. Joining me on this journey is Jesse Harley, one of the co-hosts of Canadian Politics is Boring, and filmmaker. Thank you so much for joining me today, Jesse. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me, Dakota. It's nice being on your show.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very excited. I am a big fan of your show. I've told you this before. And I've
I can hear it again. That's
gushed a bit to your co-host Reese as well, letting him know that I am a fan of your show as well. So I'm very excited to have you on.
Thanks so much. I'm glad to be here. Yeah.
Now,
I'm glad to bash Canadian cinema as one of my favorite hobbies. Honestly, it's
well, that's good. I guess you're coming from a place where you could probably do that a little bit better than me on my soapbox.
Oh well, no. I mean, everyone can be a critic.
Now, usually on your show, your co-host Reese will bring to the table a funny or a weird story involving Canadian politics in his attempt to both learn history as someone who is born in Wales and to teach and convince you that our country's history is exciting. Does it feel a bit similar without the added bonus of a reassuring Welsh accent to talk about these stories?
Honestly, if you could fake a Welsh accent for me, that would really help the process for me. I feel like that really is what does it for me. Without the Welsh accent, I don't think him and I would even be friends.
Now, as far as I could tell by my listener demographics, I don't think I have any listeners in Wales. So you know what? If I really want to make sure it stays that way, I probably should not do it.
Right. All right. That's fair.
So we're going to leave this off by saying that neither of us are war experts. So we're not going to be talking about this from any sort of formal authority. So if anyone is an expert, I apologize in advance if there are any dates, names, things that either of us get wrong.
It was a time of innocence.
Do you think maybe I could accompany you to a dance?
I don't dance with soldiers.
I could lose the uniform.
I don't dance with naked soldiers.
A time of love.
In a heartbeat, I could fall so hard.
A time of war.
The very ground we are standing on is shifting. Civilization hangs in the balance.
All right, so I guess we'll talk about the first movie, Passchendaele, which is about the lives of a troubled veteran, his nurse girlfriend, and a naive boy who intersect first in Alberta and then in Belgium during the bloody World War I battle of Passchendaele. So I remember when this movie...
Yeah, please.
I remember when this movie came out, it seemed like it was being hailed as Canada's answer to Saving Private Ryan or something like that, and I managed to miss seeing it when it first came out, but I did end up catching up with it for this, and it does not really hold up to the moniker of Saving Private Ryan.
Oh my God, no! And it's fresh in my mind. I rolled out of bed and plowed through 2 Canadian war movies before coming on this show, so it's it's a hell of a way to spend a day. I don't hate Passchendaele. I don't. It's I'm as a Canadian up and coming filmmaker. I'm no one of note, so I don't really feel I have too much of a right to be poking fun at much more successful filmmakers than I am. But the war scenes in Passchendaele were fantastic, and that made up for about a half an hour of the movie, and the rest of it was so hard to watch. It was so hard to watch.
I was quite surprised with how much of this movie did not take place on a battlefield.
Right? Yeah. Seriously. And so the text at the very end of the film was about like how, they took Passchendaele, and then 3 weeks later the Germans took it back. And that was it. Credits. I'm like, what? Hold on. What? What? Why is this an important moment in Canadian history? I don't want. And if it was so important, why wasn't more of the film about it? Oh God, it was so. It's weird, man. Sorry, but that's just yeah. Maybe we should talk about the plot a little bit before diving into the movie. Okay. I have a lot to say on it.
Yeah, it was interesting because definitely as far as the plot goes, it sort of starts out with this soldier coming back home, and you don't really know what exactly is going on with him, Paul Gross, and he seems to have an accusation leveled at him a lot. Where I believe I wrote it down, neurasthenia. You watched it more recently than I did. Is that how they pronounced it?
Oh, right.
The accusation.
I mean, that sounds the accusation of neurasthenia. I forget what it's called too. His mental condition, shell shock, basically.
Exactly.
And they called him.
So it was definitely interesting. Where like they kept being like, "Oh, he's got neurasthenia," according to his reports, which means coward. And then that was repeated several times. And then it's especially odd given that we know today that, it's a very real thing and many people went through it. And, now we know it as post-traumatic stress disorder. But it's just very odd that they decided to lean so heavily into this guy is a coward in everyone's eyes.
I suppose we should, I mean, your audience is probably already aware of this, but if you haven't seen these films, we're probably going to spoil them.
That is a fair thing to say, yes. I think this is a movie that is, almost 20 years old now, or whenever it came, 2008. So yeah, a little over 10 years now. If it gets spoiled, I don't think anyone is going to lose any spilled milk.
So it's basically a weird love story where people talk in this poetic type prose, sandwiched with two 20-minute, 30-minute war scenes. It's weird. It's very strange. It's very I like the war scenes. They were done very, very well. But the middle is it had nothing to do with Passchendaele. I don't even think it was a true story with the characters involved in it. It was so strange. Mm-hmm. And the music was god awful. Oh my God. It was horrible. Oh, the music it was like someone putting a drill straight into my brain. Sorry, can you tell how much I enjoyed this film?
I feel like it's a little ambiguous at this point.
I am curious about the accuracy of the film, at least the war aspects of it. Like at the end where his girlfriend's brother is hung up on a cross, and they had mentioned that this had happened before. And Paul Gross is like, people get thrown around that just happens with explosions. They didn't put him up. He just shut up like that. And then it happened again to someone he knows again.
It's something that I wasn't able to verify if there was any sort of veracity to that claim.
Right. But here's the weird thing that I didn't really. So, okay, that's unfortunate you couldn't find whether or not it was true or not. But the weird thing for me is they talk about it in the movie. They talked about this as having happened, someone getting blown up into as if they're being put up on a cross, and as if the enemy is taunting them by taking one of their own and hanging them up on a cross for all to see. And Paul Gross in the movie, his character, says, no, that didn't happen. It didn't actually happen like that. People just get blown around and thrown in all kinds of weird positions, and he just kind of landed like that. The enemy didn't actually do it. And then it happens again at the end of the movie, which is bizarre.
Yeah, and in a way that is very clearly staged in a, I mentioned it before we started recording, was basically like a final Jesus moment, basically.
Right. So here's the weird thing to me is, are they insinuating that this happened again coincidentally? Someone else that Paul Gross's I forget his character's name. That he knows gets blown by an explosion into the form of being hung up on a cross, coincidentally twice in his lifetime, because the enemy, or did the enemy prop him up? And if the enemy did prop him up, taunt them, why did they let them come and take him down in this weird solemn moment? I really liked that moment, honestly. It was my favorite part of the film, where everyone stopped fighting. It's like, yeah, here, go take your friend. That's fine. That was my favorite part of the entire film.
Interesting.
That's it. But I was, yeah. I thought that was, I don't know. I like things that go against the grain like that. And when, but that's me. What did you think of the ending?
That was the ending for me. Actually, really kind of took me out of the film because up to that point, there was a fairly realistic battle sequence where, you know, some of the better war movies they really sort of show the horrors and don't really shy away from the blood and guts. And even though some of the blood and guts was a little too bad CGI for me at times, the sudden stopping to take a guy down from a cross and drag him like it's, Jesus carrying a cross through his final days was just something that kind of like just took me out of the moment and didn't really work for me. And I was very confused by what Paul Gross, the director and writer, was trying to say about all of this.
I never even pieced that together with like Jesus dragging his own cross across the desert. That was the symbology that's what he was trying to pull. Like, oh my God, what he was trying to have come across. I never picked that up at all. I got the symbology of Jesus like on the cross, but him dragging his friend across the battlefield, I never put the two and two together until you mentioned it just now.
It's one of those things where like I can understand. I see what inspiration he was pulling from, but I don't see how it connected all together. And that's what sort of lost me, where it's like, I understand you're doing symbolism, but what does the symbolism mean?
Right. Yeah. I didn't get it either, honestly. I just liked the idea that a battle stopped so that like there are rules in battle. Everyone's dying horribly, but there are rules. And then suddenly one of the guys gets tossed up and hung up and he's still alive. And one guy's like, just hold on, put the whole battle on hold for a second while I go and get my friend. And one of the generals in the enemy camps are like, yeah, go ahead. Like, I don't know. It was so different that it was, to me, the most human element of the entire film. If you remove the Jesus element from it, everything else seemed so incredibly fake. Can we talk about the sex scenes? There was the first of the two completely unnecessary sex scenes blew my mind. And it was with the two young kids or, whatever, young adults, who start having sex in like on a hospital gurney overlaid with a man talking about shrapnel wounds to an audience of people, like going into graphic detail of how people are dying from infections and giant gaping holes in their side of their bodies from shrapnel wounds. This is being narrated over top of two 20-somethings having sex on a hospital gurney with happy plunky music. Like what the fuck? What was the point of this scene?
And the thing is, you're actually missing an important fact, is that was her father, the young girl's father, and I believe it was his doctor's office that they were having sex in.
Okay, sure.
So
let's just add to the weirdness.
It definitely was a bit of a out of nowhere, and like most of the time, when you sort of get these types of sex scenes, you figure you're not really going to see very much. It's going to be, a kiss and then one person lays down on top of the other one and that's it. And then you see them pulling up their pants later. No, you see some butt in this. You see some boob in this.
Butt and boob, all you need.
Yeah. So it was definitely very odd. I will not say this is a graphic sex scene. This is not graphic by any means, but it just kind of stood out as being like very out of place.
Incredibly out of place. And they were trying to make it comedic, but gross at the same time. It was so strange. It was so strange. And then the second sex scene, which is just unnecessary, which is Paul Gross' character having sex in the middle of a fucking battlefield, war zone, and for way too long. Like, way too long. There's... And then finally the camera pans away as they're humping in the corner of the screen, and then they go off screen and the camera keeps panning to see this amazing battlefield being like blown up with like just flashing lights of bombs everywhere in the middle of the night. And it was like, oh, okay, that's kind of cinematic. I kind of like that. It's a nice way to end that scene. And then they cut right back to the sex scene and they keep going. It's just, I'm like, why? Stop. Sorry. Those are... I got all my complaints out at once. There you
go. well, thank you very much. It was something that I wasn't planning on touching on, but I'm glad you did. because it definitely did really stick out.
Yeah.
But I think the one of the things that I do sort of want to commend this film for is Paul Gross did pack a lot of little history. It was easier for me in this one to kind of keep notes, be like, oh, what does this mean? What does that mean? And kind of go and look it up afterwards than it was for Hyena Road, something we'll talk about later on. But right at the very beginning, there's the opening title card that talks about how it takes place in 1917, and 600,000 soldiers were sent over there, and 10% of them died, and all this sort of stuff. So it's definitely sort of sets the mood as far as what's going on. But then throughout it, I feel like there was quite a bit of layering of historical fact that I found really interesting, which was interesting. There's one of the characters, one of the majors, who talks about being a South African veteran. And so I was looking up into that and what was that all about? And the South African War was a key event in the military history of Canada. It was the first time in history that Canada had actually dispatched troops to an overseas war. So that was really interesting, between the Dutch South Africans and the British South Africans. So what was like the Boer War. And so the British, called Canada and be like, hey, time to pay back a little bit for us letting you have a country. Come and fight our war against the Dutch now. So it was definitely interesting that they included that detail, because that's something I had no idea about. And I definitely am thankful that I was able to learn about that a little bit.
Yeah, that is interesting, actually. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did appreciate the little tidbits of history that they sprinkled throughout the film. I thought that was interesting. I'll give it that.
Mm-hmm. And they talked about how it was like the first time that gas was being used in warfare. Oh
yeah, that's right. They did too.
Mm-hmm. And just some very interesting descriptions of Vimy Ridge where the battle takes place. And then one little, I think, tidbit that they kind of threw in there is halfway through the movie when Paul Gross's character Michael Dunn is basically re-enlisting to go back over there to protect this young kid. He uses the last name McCrae, which is the name of the poet John McCrae, who wrote In Flanders Fields.
No way. Oh, cool.
So
okay. Was that coincidence, or do you think they did that on purpose?
I have to believe they did it on purpose. That, it's a World War I movie. Using the name McCrae, you would only think of one thing. Like, I can't think of an example, but if it was something else where they threw in a last name, you're like, this obviously means this. Like, it can't mean anything else. Was
Passchendaele anywhere near Flanders Fields?
Yes, because this was the second battle of Ypres in Belgium, which is what this Passchendaele was. Basically, it was in the Battle of Ypres, so it was the exact same area.
Oh wow! Okay, so that can't be a coincidence. Yeah, that's very neat.
So I don't think it's one of those things where I don't know if he was basically insinuating that he wrote In Flanders Fields, his character, or what, because it seems sort of odd where you would basically use, I don't know, arguably the most famous World War I soldier's name to be something else. So I don't know exactly what he meant by this, if it was just a nod or if it was meant to be something different, but I think there has to be some sort of connection with that.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. Honestly, I think that's kind of a neat tidbit of information that you found. I'm quite impressed that you found that.
It was just one of those things where, I remember, I know on your show you did recently a Canadian Heritage Moment, those commercials, and I'm pretty sure that there was one about the writing of In Flanders Fields, and that's probably why.
That's where I learned about it, was the Canadian Heritage Minutes. Yeah,
there you go. Yeah, and so that's probably why I just remember that name sort of stuck out in my head. And so as soon as he said that, I was like, McCrae, I know that name. And so of course I looked it up afterwards, and sure enough, it was who I thought it was.
That's very cool, man. I got to give that to you. That's very neat. I like that.
Yeah. And so, it's interesting because if we think about, what I remember of Canada at war from, being taught in elementary school, I'm much more familiar from what I can remember of Canada being active in World War I than it was in World War II. I feel like Canada was more of a passive participant in World War II, even though it was crucial to a lot of the efforts there. But I do remember being taught that, Canada's big deal was World War One, and so I appreciate that. We get so many World War II movies, especially coming out of the U.S. It's nice to sort of see where we were at during World War One.
Yeah, no kidding. I actually didn't know that we were more prominent in World War One than World War II, or more prominently. What's the word I'm looking for? I can't word very well today. I was speaking with my stepfather, who was 10 years old when World War One happened. Yeah, he's 88, turning 89 years old, and he was 10 years old in 1917, or maybe not 1917, whenever we could do the math, but around whenever World War One, he was 10 years old, and he was living in the prairies at the time, and was terrified of bombers, like coming in and dropping bombs, and he would see news footage of plane bombers, and he would have nightmares of it. And one day he was over at a friend's of his place, and I guess his friend's mother or neighbor, I forget which, had just learned about the attack on Pearl Harbor. And she just told my stepdad, Jim, the Japanese are attacking. And, a 10-year-old boy thinks, oh, my God, the Japanese are attacking Canada right here, right now, the prairies. And so he ran home as fast as he could, just ignoring everything on the way, and burst into the doors and told his parents to get in the basement. The Japanese are attacking. And they didn't. They actually knew better. They were watching the news and they explained it to him. But this is that's that's the closest I can come to knowing someone who was around during World War One, and he was perfectly safe in the prairies. But still, that's my little tidbit of my family's involvement in World War One. There you go.
Well,
enjoy.
I feel really terrible right now, but Pearl Harbor was 1941.
Pearl Harbor was 1941?
Yes, which was World War II.
Oh. Well then. Well, if you think about it, 1920, so that'd be 80 years. Yeah, that would make him like 123. Mm-hmm. If so. Right. Yeah. Okay. World War II it is. I didn't do the math on that one. No, he couldn't. If he was 10 years old in 1917, he'd be very, very old. You should have stopped.
He would be 103 now.
No,
he would be 123. Yes. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
No, still, I appreciate that story. That was a great story.
Very foolish. You should have stopped me halfway through, like at the beginning. I was all proud telling my stepfather's story to your audience, and here I am talking about one of the oldest men alive.
Well,
there you go. Jesse Harley, co-producer of Canadian Politics is Boring, can't do math. So
it's all good. I feel like I have a somewhat similar family story. I don't quite know. I don't have as much information as you, but my stepfather's mother, so my grandmother, was born in 1912, and I do remember, she died several years ago. She lived till she was like 102, 103, something like that. And I do remember trying to ask her about that era, but she didn't really remember it. But I just remember things were tough. That's basically the gist of what I got was things were tough and the family was poor. Mind you, she also had like 14 siblings.
Right. Yeah. That's
I'm sure it was tough even at the best of times with that sort of family situation.
Okay. 14 siblings. Oh my God.
Yeah. And I think there were more, but they weren't quite sure because some of them died when they were children. And it's one of those eras where records weren't, super thorough, where if you're not really a person until you make it past the age of 4.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's interesting.
That sort of thing. So I think there was a few like very young child deaths and things like that. So they're not quite sure exactly how many siblings she might have had, because I think she was like the second youngest or the youngest of them all.
Good Lord.
Yeah.
All right, that's impressive.
Yeah. So I guess we'll go, way segue back to Passchendaele. Yeah, it's interesting. So a lot of this movie does take place in Alberta. We see a concentrated effort of, recruitment and not quite a draft, but obviously trying to shame young men into signing up. And even if that means lying about any illness or disability you might have, which the main young kid, he does have, does he have asthma or something like that?
Yeah, he had asthma.
Yeah.
Right. There was a scene in it where they had everyone stand up and applause. And then the main British asshat, I forget his name. He was a great actor. I liked his character, but he asked all the women to take a seat, and then all the elderly to take a seat, and then anyone who was too young to enlist to take a seat, and then all the rest of the eligible men. He's like, "Why the fuck aren't you out on the battlefield right now, you cowards?" Pretty much, like I'm paraphrasing, but yeah, like pretty much shaming. Like if you're not out there trying to get yourself killed, what's wrong with you?
Yeah,
I'm wondering how much of that actually happened.
Yeah, that was basically the whole gist of that, and so it's definitely interesting where you probably would feel a lot of societal pressure, and it goes back to like the scene earlier where the young man who I probably should, I've got the IMDb page open, I probably should know his name by this point. Oh, David is his name, who is wants to marry this young woman and goes to basically ask her father for permission to propose, and he's like, sure, are you going to fight in the war first? Which ends up, we later learn that he basically tricked him to sign up so that way he would die over there, that way his daughter could marry someone better. Which is
I was wondering about that, actually.
Pretty
Yeah,
cool
I was
thing to
wondering.
do.
Yeah, no kidding, right? That's that was interesting.
Yeah.
And
then, of course,
I don't know, I'm wondering how much of I really would like to know more about the politics behind the social pressure of signing people up for the war.
I imagine
I'm
it
not
was
too
quite high. Like, I feel like we're so inundated with American Vietnam movies and stuff like that, where we can probably safely say that you were pretty well expected to sign up, and the people that were drafted, you were expected to go over there and serve your country, despite everything that we know. People knew going into the damn war that it was a bogus war at best, sort of thing. And so, considering that World War I, had a much better cause behind it, I can't imagine what the societal pressure would have been like.
Right.
Yeah, that's something that I probably should have looked a little bit more into to see like what was the enlistment records like, what was the just the general numbers for all that sort of stuff. Obviously, I know that like over 600,000 soldiers went over there and 60,000 died, which is kind of an insane number. I imagine that
especially if you consider Canada's population at the time.
Yeah. I'm sure that was like a not insignificant number.
Well, they said it at the beginning of the movie. I believe they said it was 8 million, which is really quite small.
Yeah. I'm in Toronto, and that's basically the greater Toronto area.
Right.
Southern
yeah.
Ontario area, I guess, to be more specific.
Yeah.
I guess we could talk a little bit about that last little battle scene, where I thought that was probably the real highlight of the film. They do a really great job of kind of showing the intensity, where once you're, less than 6 feet away from someone, your gun is better used as a bludgeoning tool than it is to actually shoot someone. And so you really get some of the horrors of war that you could probably understand why someone would get diagnosed with neurasthenia.
Right.
I'm probably pronouncing it wrong still.
The last scene, maybe, I don't know. The last scene in Passchendaele, the giant battle was spectacular in my mind. I thought it was really, really well made. Best part of the whole film. And Paul Gross, after watching both of his both of the movies that I watched tonight, Hyena Road and Passchendaele, he has an affinity for blowing people up. he's really good at it. Like he's like an explosion will happen and then a singular body, it's only ever one body, will go spinning. Like, I mean, like just not flying away. They spin, they twirl through the air like a tornado and often land bouncing off of something every single time. And it's amazing to watch. He's really good at it and he does it a lot. It's quite impressive.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It almost
reminds
me.
I didn't really have any point other than that. That was it.
It actually almost reminded me a little bit of the Mel Gibson movie Hacksaw Ridge from a couple years ago. Did you ever see that one?
I never did. No.
No. Okay. It's you know what? I actually kind of compare it similarly, minus the whole Alberta section of this movie, which is most of the movie. But it's basically the story of a conscientious objector in World War II who is forced to go, and so he serves as a medic and doesn't want to carry a gun, and so he sees all these horrors of war and he's just trying to save lives no matter what happened without a gun to basically protect himself, and that would be the only way that he would actually serve. And if anyone's seen any Mel Gibson movie, Mel Gibson loves blowing people up too and killing people in ridiculous fashion. And it actually sort of ends in a very Jesus-y way too, which is very Mel Gibson as well. But that sort of like way over the top, like, I don't know if the physics are real or not, but it's definitely something that's going to stick in your head as far as body parts flying around.
Right. He does the gore in these films is surprising. Mm-hmm. For one, it's out of nowhere. Like the these Passchendaele seems to be like a very it's trying to be a romantic film. It's trying to be a beautiful cinematic film. It's trying to be poetic. It's trying to be and then even the war scenes are trying to be poetic in a sense and cinematic. But then out of nowhere, it kind of jolts you out of it and just throws in this like very graphic gore. And like, I get it. It's the war that happened, sure. But this entire time you've been telling a different story. You've been showing a different aspect of the war. Like, and it's very unsettling and takes you right out of it. And like, yeah, they can argue the whole time. Like, well, that's how the war was. Like, sure. Yeah, that's how the war was. I get it. But like, I don't know. The gore took me out of it. Honestly, the gore, I don't think that helped anything.
I feel like we can kind of wrap up on this if we have any last thoughts, but I think one of the main criticisms, and I don't know if it sort of sounds like it's the same for you about this movie, is that it's kind of tonally inconsistent at times, where it sort of jumps from genre to genre and doesn't really know what it's trying to be while trying to be multiple things at the same time, even when it doesn't know what it wants to be.
Yeah, it's not a war film. For one thing, I'd say you hit it right on the head. Honestly, that's probably the best way to sum that up. Mm-hmm. And real briefly, before we leave Passchendaele, I forget the guy's name? I've seen him in other stuff. The one-armed man. Can we talk about that prosthetic? His buddy in the town who only had one arm.
Yeah.
So intensely fake looking. Just like, it was amazingly bad, like poorly done. Mm-hmm. It was like just glaringly bad. Like you could tell his arm was all stuffed up and like it was just. Am I the only one who noticed that? Did you see that too? Was this?
Yeah, I think I really noticed it the first time that we meet him in the bar or something like that, where he stood up from the table or something like that, and I'm like, oh, he looks like he's got like a scarecrow shirt on where it's just stuffed with hay or something like that, because it was so rigid.
Yeah, that's the best way to put it. It's exactly what he looked like. Yeah.
And then I don't know if I just accepted it, or maybe it was just like that one day it was the worst, like the first costume fitting, and they later decided, no, we can do better than this. But I definitely didn't notice it later on. So I don't know if that was just like a me thing where I was like, oh yeah, this is how this guy looks with his ridiculous fake arm. Or did it actually get better later on? So how did you feel about that?
I did see it later on. It did not get better.
Okay.
it was pretty bad.
So it was still scarecrowy the whole way through.
It was, definitely scarecrowy the whole way through. And is it me or Paul Gross seems to like to shock people with, he tries shock value. He uses a lot of shock value. Like, the rat crawling out of the dead corpse's mouth. And then in Hyena Road, where a corpse that he just shot in the head, gets pushed back on him, and his arm goes straight through the back of his skull, through the guy's mouth. Like, this is unnecessary. But he does shit like this. I feel like I don't even know why he does shit like this. Shits and giggles, right? There's shock. The armless man, the one-armed man, getting into a fight by shoving the stump of his arm into the mouth of one of the guys in the bar. Just like, I feel like this is shock value for shock value's sake. It doesn't really add anything to the character development, to the plot, to the story, or anything like that. And it's very out of place for the genre of these films that he's creating.
Yeah, that's why I sort of compare it a little bit to Mel Gibson's films, where he very much is like that as well, where he'll just kind of throw in something to shock you just for the sake of shocking you. Like, right. Another movie I sort of think about is 1917 that came out last year. Did you see that one?
Loved it.
Okay,
Loved
so
it.
Did I.
Thought it was amazing.
And so I would compare it not similarly, but there's a scene in that early on where they're in the underground tunnels or whatever it is, and then all of a sudden some rats come out and it freaks you out, but it's not done to shock you because it very clearly has a plot element behind it that causes them to trip some wires that explodes whatever this bunker that they're in.
Right.
So it all makes sense. There's a reason behind, being scared by that. Whereas this, like you said, when you see the rat come out of the guy's mouth, it really freaks you out, but there's no reason behind it other than to be like, yeah, war is dirty and gross.
Right. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And again, like, as you mentioned before, it seemed like he didn't know what kind of genre he wanted this movie to be. If it was this is a gross and dirty war movie, and that's the genre, and we're going to really push that from beginning to end, then that sort of stuff would fit pretty well, but it's mixing genres is tough. And it can take you out if you spend a half an hour building a certain sort of feeling and then dive in a completely opposite direction. It can kind of ruin things.
Yeah. So it's sort of like, if you want to go the very gory way, the Saving Private Ryan route, where war is intense, war is hell, where you're going to see everything, or you can go sort of like the Pearl Harbor movie route, where it's like it's so romanticized and it's about the relationships between these two pilots and the women that they love and this sort of thing. You can go that route, but then when you're trying to do both at the same time, and it's a lot of
I never saw Pearl Harbor
and eating it too.
I never saw Pearl Harbor. I was told many times not to see Pearl Harbor, so I'm going to continue not seeing Pearl Harbor.
That's fine.
Michael Bay.
I'm going to admit that I have not seen it either. I'm just aware of it.
Oh.
You caught me in my lie.
Shall we talk about Hyena Road?
Yeah, so we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about Hyena Road.
I'm building a road, gentlemen. I'm building a road, and it is going like a dagger into the heart of the enemy. But I've lost 36 civilians in the last 4 months. And this has got to stop.
I'm your partner in peace.
This is the birthplace of the Taliban. 54,000 square kilometers of insurgency, tribal rivalry, and blood feuds.
I need eyes on that road. There's gonna be fireworks. This is gonna get personal.
I'm here, aren't I?
All right, so the next movie we're going to talk about is Hyena Road, which as I said earlier, is also directed by Paul Gross. It tells the story of 3 different men, 3 different worlds, 3 different wars, all stand at the intersection of modern warfare, a murky world of fluid morality where all is not as it seems. I think off the top, it sort of reminded me, I said Passchendaele was sort of Canada's answer to Saving Private Ryan. I feel like Hyena Road was Canada's answer to The Hurt Locker, where it was, supposed to be this ambiguousness where sometimes you have to be the bad guy to be the good guy, and you don't really know who the enemy is and who can you trust and all that sort of stuff. So it definitely had a lot of Hurt Locker vibes for me. Overall, as far as a movie goes, I did enjoy Hyena Road much more than I enjoyed Passchendaele.
As did I. From 2 different perspectives, though. Like, cinematically speaking, it's a much better movie in general, just as a movie that was created. That being said, I found it difficult to follow a lot of the times. I'm just not really into that sort of war drama. It's not something that I would naturally be gravitate towards. So for someone who is not already naturally gravitating towards that sort of information, those sort of stories, I found it wasn't very easy to digest. I felt like this sort of story is for people who already follow these sorts of stories. And there were some weird moments too, where there would be Afghanis speaking in a foreign language, and I was watching it I didn't have any subtitles. And I'm like, oh, this is probably subtitles. And I searched and I found, oh, this is on Netflix. And I went on Netflix and I turned on subtitles, and all it said was speaking in a foreign language. And it'd be weird because they'd be doing this for like 60 seconds, like a full minute of people talking in another language. And you have no idea what they're saying or why that scene even exists. It's weird, man. And there's a few of them. It's very, very strange.
Yeah, it was definitely odd. This is a sort of movie where every once in a while I'll come across a movie where in the moment you're like, I'm not quite sure exactly what's going on. And then by like a scene or two later, you kind of understand what had happened before, because they kind of recap it by being like, hey, I'm going to fill you in on what you missed. And so they kind of did that. So like, I agree with you. There were moments where I was like, oh, I'm not quite sure exactly what the plan is here. But then later on, 10, 15 minutes later, you're like, all right, I'm on board. I'm with you again. Keep going.
Yeah, that's pretty much how I was watching this movie. It was very confusing, intermittently confusing, and like everything had to be explained. I'm glad they explained it, because I wouldn't have been able to follow it otherwise. I still don't really fully understand what happened at the end. I gotta admit, I don't really get it. And I was trying to follow it. I really was, but maybe you can help me. So the ghost who took out the guy's BD King's son's severed head out of a sack and threw it at his feet. He wanted to die with honor, and that's why Paul Gross's character was screaming at the sniper, don't kill BD King, because we want BD King to kill the ghost, to give him an honorable death, I guess. And then that didn't happen. They shot him anyway, and then the ghost just shows up when all of a sudden these insurgents show up out of nowhere for no reason. Just I guess. And then the guy asks, please kill us. Like he asked and overrode. It's like, no, I want you to send the bombs. Kill me. Yes. No, I'm aware that I'm in love and have a child on the way, but I want you to kill me now. And everyone's okay with this. Like, except for the woman. The woman's the only one who's not okay with this. Everyone's like, yep, well, he's got to die. Okay. Well, there we go. It was like, what happened? Can you explain the ending to me? I do not understand. No, other than we can't let them take us alive. They talked about that earlier. If we take us alive, they'll do unspeakable things. What things? We don't speak of them.
I think you described the ending as best as I could. They talk about it a lot, where there's an honor code for this group of people, and I wish I'd written down what they were calling it, because apparently, that was fairly accurate as far as what they were trying to, the actual ways that they were saying. So
what part were you, what part are you referring to?
Just in general, throughout the movie, they talk about how there's an honor code. There's the one guy who's like their go-between. I can't remember his name right now. Who they gave the
guy who would wash the windows and wash the chairs. And
yes, I think his name was Cleaner or something like that.
Clean. That's funny. That's
Haji Baba, the Cleaner. That's his name, according to IMDb. He several times talked about how there is a code for different Afghan warriors, and by all accounts, that is very accurate as well, as far as wanting to die nobly and things you're willing to do. Basically, because he had saved the ghost's life earlier, the ghost was now indebted to them, sort of thing. And then when it was time for him to die, It was the ghost's time to die, and they didn't let him die that way. As far as I understand, that's what they were doing. So once again, this is, Paul Gross trying to put some actual information in it that maybe us as an audience aren't really aware of and maybe totally getting. But
right. They go, I didn't get it either. Right. But again, once again, it's something that was explained to us after the fact. Mm-hmm. He's like, he had to die with honor. You took it away. He's got nothing now. I'm like, really? This is so weird to follow, man. I would one small thing before I forget. David Warnsby the editor of Hyena Road. David, if you're listening to this podcast, I want to let you know I spotted it. I might be the only one, but I spotted it. There was a guy who was shot at the very beginning of the film, and they took that exact same footage, and they had a guy be shot at the end of the film. It was the same dude. Dude, same shot, same blood, exact same shot. And I got it, David. Shame on you, David Warnsby.
You're going to have to give me some timestamps later, and I'm going to have to look this up. So I'm curious. This is two movies where very overtly Paul Gross is inserting a romantic subplot, and I don't know how well it worked in Passchendaele. It sort of worked when they were sort of all in on the romantic drama stuff, but less so when they were trying to meld it with the actual battle stuff. Here, it seemed a little more naturalistic, I guess.
Totally. But after having just watched Passchendaele, I knew how this movie was. I knew how Hyena Road was going to end. After the guy's girlfriend gets pregnant, I'm like, oh, you're going to go off to die now.
Yeah,
like that's what Paul Gross does. Right? He gets a main character engrossed in a romantic entanglement and then kills them. I knew he was going to die. The moment she was pregnant, I knew he was going to die.
It's funny. I watched this one with my wife, and that's what she said. She's like, oh, he's not making it to the end.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But overall, I do think the actual writing mechanics worked a lot better as far as inserting a romantic subplot.
Oh my God, 1,000 times. Mm-hmm. Way, way better. Oh yeah.
Especially the fact that it wasn't I think she had a lot better agency too. Yeah.
I mean, they it wasn't the main plot of the story. Mm-hmm. It was more realistic as a side note, which were like, it was, their love was taboo because it wasn't allowed on their base, and their careers are in danger. And that was a kind of nice little subplot that anyone could really like. They didn't need it. It was a war movie, but like this kind of allowed us, to view them as, what's the word I'm looking for? Help me out here. Where, oh my God, I'm having a huge brain fart right now. I'm so sorry. To relate to them more. There you go, Jesse. That's the words I'm looking for. Thank you. I'm. It sounds like I'm shitting on Hyena Road. I quite liked the film. Mm-hmm. I thought it was quite a good film. The writing was excellent. The acting was way better than Passchendaele. The cinematography was great. It was run and gun and nitty gritty, and I liked that. Mm-hmm. So yeah, no. Overall, I thought it was much better film. I think I'm just nitpicking now for the sake of nitpicking.
and you talk about the acting, and I think that's true because you look in Passchendaele, and outside of Paul Gross, a lot of the rest of the cast aren't really that notable. There's the one major, his boss, who was like the big dick to him the whole time. I thought he was excellent in his role, but other than that, no one really stood out. Whereas in Hyena Road, a lot of the cast is a lot more well known. If you have Ross of Sutherland, who's Donald Sutherland's son and Kiefer's half brother, who mostly does Canadian
I did not know
stuff.
that. That's cool.
Yeah, it looks nothing like him. But is quite an accomplished Canadian actor and does a very serviceable job in this movie. And then Alan Hocko, who was the lead in that Republic of Doyle for like 5 years, how long that show was on for. Wow. So he's been around. And then of course, like you go through the cast and most of the supporting actors are a little bit more well known. The one performance I think didn't work for me was Clark Johnson, who plays the general, who I most know him as one of the actors in season 5 of The Wire. I don't know if you ever watched that, but he's in the season where it's about the newspaper, and so he works as a reporter. He does an excellent job in that. So now that's what
I haven't seen The Wire. I've been told to watch it though.
Very, very excellent show. I will add to the list of people telling you that you should watch it. And I don't know if you ever will get around to it because it's quite heavy and very hard to follow at times.
Oh, okay. Well, you're really selling it.
But it's so worth it. The payoff is so worth it. But yeah, I thought his character was just way too over the top for this movie.
Which character was
he? Was the general, so he would come in like every 45 minutes or so and just like be like what the fuck is going on here? I don't gonna fucking do this. And then he'd leave.
Oh, that guy. Oh, sorry. I thought I was confusing with Passchendaele, the British general.
No.
Okay. Yeah, no, the really angry man. Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
So his was the only performance that didn't really work for me, just because it felt out of place.
Fair enough. Yeah, I'll give you that. And it's only because it was, exacerbative. Mm-hmm. Exacerbative? Is that a word? I'm going to say it's a word. No, I thought the acting was excellent. I was by everybody, almost everyone. Yeah, I would say it was very well cast. I was quite impressed with Paul Gross's ability to make Alberta look like Afghanistan.
Quite impressive, wasn't it?
Yeah, it really was. It wasn't even Alberta. Sorry, it was Manitoba.
Yeah, Manitoba. Yeah, I think they did some shooting in Jordan. I think it was, but I'm sure that was more for like the aerial. Shoot, what's the word? The opening shots.
Right.
I'm blanking. Establishing shots. Thank you. Yes, the establishing shots where you'd be like, where it would like show the whole desert basically, but everything else, right. All the base stuff, that was all Manitoba.
Amazing. Mm-hmm. And Reese and I are trying to get a show made in Manitoba, or at least about Manitoba. So this is this is coincidence for us. Manitoba Nights. We want to make a cop show, but
is that the one about the UFO landing? I feel like I listened to that episode of your show.
No, that's a totally different television. We've got 35 different television shows that we want to make.
I feel like it's a different TV show and a different merchandise item of every show you guys have.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. No, I thought they. I realized they used a lot of B-roll of Jordan or in Afghanistan, and but it was very saturated, it's oversaturated almost, and I'm not really sure why they did that.
I'm guessing, just highlighting the yellows of the desert. It's one of those things where like I've seen a bunch of like memes where, anytime Mexico is shown in an American movie or TV show, everything is super saturated in yellow, when in reality it doesn't look anything like that. So I think that's just the sort of look they were going for. Right.
Now the color was done very, very well in this film. The day for night shots were spectacularly done, which is not something you ever say about day for night shots. I was quite impressed, I got to say.
Yeah, overall, this really was a huge step up in production value. This is more than a decade later, and he didn't do any other films in between it that he directed. So I don't know what he did that he learned so many lessons.
I don't know. I wonder what the budget is between them.
Yeah, I don't know either. I do remember at the time, like I just remember Passchendaele being so heavily promoted. Anytime you go to the movie theater at the time for like a year in advance, and you turn on CBC or whatever, there always seemed to be promoting it. I'm pretty sure at the time it was the most expensive Canadian movie ever made.
That sounds about right.
Mm-hmm. Where like it's one of those things where war movies just for some reason always cost so much more, because the amount of like you have to rent tanks and rent planes for your background shots, and if you're firing ammunition, you're still firing real guns, even if they're blank bullets, because you've got to see like the casing pop out of the gun and stuff like that. So they're really shooting these guns. Those are real ammunition. They just don't have tips on the end of it, basically. So yeah,
I did not.
Yeah, when in movies, like unless it's like a terrible CGI where you can tell if the gun is not really being shot, a real, how do I word this? The simplest way. Basically, if a gun is being shot, that is a real gun. They treat it as real live ammo. The difference is if you see a bullet, there's a little rounded knob at the end of it. That's what gets fired off and into the target, basically. That isn't there. So there's still gunpowder in the bullet. There's still the casing and all that sort of stuff. And the shell casing still has to eject from the gun. So it is considered live ammunition. That's
amazing.
That's how Brandon Lee died on the set of The Crow, where
I'm aware. Yeah.
Yeah, where the gun jammed. That was slightly different, where the shell casing didn't eject, and then they reshot the scene and shot it again. So I think it was called like a double fire or something like that. So basically, the shell casing in front acted as a bullet,
Right.
and that's what killed him.
Yeah. No, I remember that story. It was as horrifying as it was. I discovered how much the movies cost. So Passchendaele cost $20 million US. I don't know why it said US, but $20 million US, which is a huge amount of money for a Canadian film.
Mm-hmm.
Just massive. And then Hyena Road cost $12.5 million, which again is massive for a Canadian movie. And I'm almost wondering if the smaller budget for Hyena Road helped with the creativity. Like helped. Does that make sense? Like it's
absolutely.
The more, yeah. You know, if you feel like you've got all the money in the world to make your movie, you become less creative, if that makes sense. Yeah. Things that's smaller budgets help. Oh my God, I'm not wording at all. I can't use my words today. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
I do, yes, and I agree with you, because more often than not, you look at directors who have had limitations imposed upon them, whether it's by their studios or, depending on the era of when the movie is made, different societal restrictions, things like that. And more often than not, they rise to the occasion. You know, I think the best example is someone like Alfred Hitchcock, who couldn't show the amount of, violence and gore and sex that he probably would have loved to include in his movies, but because he couldn't, it was more left up to the viewer's imagination to sort of fill in the blanks, and he did it so expertly. And I think this is sort of the same thing. You tell me that Passchendaele cost $20 million US to make, and the fact that it doesn't contain a single A-list star, where was all that money going to? Because more often than not, like you look at something like a Marvel movie and you're like, oh yeah, I understand why the Avengers cost $300 million to make this. The cast alone probably cost them $100 million just to film it.
Well, I mean, 20 million seems about right for Passchendaele. Honestly, a lot of it was taking place outside. There was a lot of locations. The fact that it was a period piece itself would have cost so much amount of money. And the war scenes, I mean, they had to create these giant sound stages where then they also had to control the weather. So the fact that they did it for 20 million. Only 20 million was actually quite impressive. Like you couldn't get a Hollywood movie with the same sort of elements in it for 20 million or less. Like so it's actually kind of impressive to me that it cost as little as 20 million.
Yeah.
But as even as bad as it was.
And there's also, of course, a point where too little money would definitely hinder you. Like if I was to say, hey, Jesse, here's $500,000 to go make a movie, you would turn to me and say, that wouldn't cover the cost to rent the camera.
I mean, you could definitely make a movie for $500,000.
You can, but like if you're wanting to make it as professional as possible, like the actual camera rental equipment and the different lenses and the processing just for that aspect of the movie is probably going to run you most, if not all, of that budget before you even get to anything else that you might need to pay for. I
mean, in this particular, it's like, I see where you're going with that, and the essence of what you're arguing is true. In that particular example is not accurate at all. But yes, if you, depending on the style of movie you're making too, if you want it to be very cinematic in nature, so you're going to want to have, very expensive lenses, you want to have dollies, you want to have jib arms, you're going to want to have like assistant camera operators and things of that nature, then sure, that's going to run you quite a large, and plus you're going to want to have a lot of cinematic lighting and stuff like that. But if you want to do more gritty, like Hyena Road was, a few cameramen who would punch in and zoom in and make it seem more realistic. They didn't need as expensive lenses. They didn't need as elaborate lighting setups or jib arms or dollings running like for the majority of the footage, and allowed them to do it cheaper. In fact, I knew a film that was shot in the same way. It played at I think it was the Sedona Film Festival, or no, not Sedona. It was at I forget which film festival it was. It was quite well made though, and it was just It was same style as Hyena Road, where basically 2 or 3 cameras shooting over people's shoulders as they had conversations, and they would punch in and they'd zoom in and stuff like that. And it was very found footage-esque, but where people didn't acknowledge the fact that the cameras were there. It's the middle of the ground sort of style of shooting, which is becoming more and more popular over the past decade. And I believe that movie was shot for $500.
Whoa, really?
Yeah. I mean, everyone did it for free. Everyone volunteered their time. And they already had the equipment on hand, or it's not like they bought fresh cameras for the shoot or anything like that, right? But like, yeah, it essentially, like, you couldn't shoot Passchendaele for $500,000 even if you tried, but you could shoot a run and gun found footage horror movie for $500,000. It depends on what you're trying to make, essentially.
Yeah. The difference between the Blair Witch Project versus, something different is obviously
exactly.
stark.
Yeah, sorry for going down that that rambling road, rant.
that is fine. So I guess we could talk a little bit maybe about as far as the realness as this movie sort of contained. I obviously am much more familiar with this era because I lived through it. I was, a teenager basically at this point in the early 2010s. But I do remember, Canada going over to Afghanistan and choosing not to follow the US into Iraq. And I know that was a pretty big deal to the Americans that we were supposed to be their closest ally and we're not following them into Iraq, but we are going over to Afghanistan where there seemed to be an actual threat going on. So, and I guess my sort of perception of we were portrayed as basically UN light, where we would go in there, we were to be the peacekeepers. Yes, we would engage in combat, but at the same time, we weren't there to, overthrow the government.
Right. And I mean, I think they kind of hinted at stuff like that in the movie in Hyena Road, where they weren't allowed engaging unless they saw an imminent violent threat in front of them. Like, they couldn't decide people's fates for them in their country. The only rule that they could sort of act on is if they saw an imminent danger from a violent weapon, like a gun, essentially, then they could choose to act in the moment. But other than that, if like when the children were kidnapped but not at gunpoint, legally they weren't allowed doing anything. I'm like, that's fascinating. I wish they had talked a little bit more about, like, given some more political backstory as to why that is. They kind of brushed over it real quickly. I know they had a small conversation afterwards, but they're just like, oh, there's bigger pictures at work here. You don't understand. Like, that's kind of all they gave us.
That whole sequence is probably why I appreciated this movie more, because it gave a whole bunch of gray area ambiguity to who these people are and what their actual mission was.
Right.
So
yeah,
I appreciated that.
Yeah, I appreciated it too. Honestly, I did. Some gritty realism, and the fact that Paul Gross is like, I don't know what war I'm I don't know what I'm doing here anymore. It's just like a 3D game of chess for me. I don't know. I was like, okay, that's I don't know if that's going to win you any medals, but anyway, that's all. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, and I think, doing a little bit of research, I'll sort of kind of conclude with this point is it was fairly accurate historically, but the difference being, this focuses on an English language unit, but in reality, this group of people who were building and protecting this highway in the middle of the desert was actually a French language unit, the Royal 22nd Regiment, which was formed in 1869, and instead they basically just transitioned it over to Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, which is based in Western Canada. Other than changing the name, they basically kept most of the actual job and work that they were doing on this Royal 22nd Regiment, which their nickname was the Vendus, because in French it is Vendus 22nd.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's clever. Okay. Mm-hmm. Princess Patricia?
Yes.
What's the story there?
I believe she was the daughter of a governor general.
And she was a princess?
I guess so.
Being the daughter of a governor general automatically makes her a princess? I don't know.
I do not believe so. I will quickly pull this up and be able to accurately say it. It is named for Princess Patricia of Connaught, daughter of the then Governor General in Canada. From 1914 was when this battalion was named.
Wow. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So what happened in the movie? Were those like historically accurate things that occurred, or is this, how much of the story was fiction? And
I'm not totally sure on, other than the fact that that they were a group that built this highway and their main job was dismantling improvised explosive devices. So basically the plot of The Hurt Locker.
Right. Yeah. Thus Canada's response to The Hurt Locker, right?
I think that's more me saying that after watching and being like, yeah, this feels a lot like The Hurt Locker.
I'd say it's an accurate description. Yeah. Or depiction. Yeah, for sure. I quite liked it.
Yeah, and apparently this group, the Royal 22nd Regiment, was involved in a lot of close combat with the Taliban and helped set up a lot of the police forces in Afghanistan, and were involved in training them to basically take over and be able to protect their own people and land, basically.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
So that would have been, I don't know, and maybe in my opinion, that might have been a bit better of a story to maybe tell than this one, where I'm not quite sure if it's real or not, where
right.
I feel like there's definitely some fictionalization going on.
Yeah, I feel like if it was as brutal as, if what happened was factually accurate, then we probably would have heard more about it in the news, honestly.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. So I think that that's a good place to sort of wrap it up. Overall, I think it's interesting. We live in a country that I feel doesn't always do a good enough job educating, whether it's students or people, about its history at times, as I'm sure you're probably well aware of that by this point.
Oh yeah.
And it was an interesting sort of look of, one person's fascination with Canadian War and his interpretations of that, whether they were always on the right track or not. Right.
No, I appreciated the films. I even appreciated Passchendaele, as bad as it was. I'm happy for the stories that I was some of the information, at least I learned. I walked away having learned stuff. So that's what I'll take from that.
Well, excellent. Jesse, thank you so much for joining me today. It was a real pleasure. If people want to find out more about you or check out your show, what's the best place to do that?
Yeah, thank you again, Dakota, for having me on your show. I had a wonderful time. Sorry for my ranting. My brain's in a weird spot today, but I hope I was a good enough guest for your show and your audience. If people would like to find me elsewhere, I have a little podcast with my co-host and friend Reese Waters, and the name of that show is Canadian Politics is Boring, where Reese, a Welsh immigrant, tries to teach me, an ignorant Canadian citizen, all about Canadian politics and Canadian history, and the fact that it is far more entertaining and interesting than I give credit for. That's our show. Canadian Politics is Boring. Go check it out. Thanks.
So on the very last episode, do you have to admit that Canadian politics is not boring? Is that how that works?
Yeah, and then I get a cookie. Yeah.
Once again, Jesse, thank you so much for joining me today.
No, thank you. Thank you. It was a lot of fun.
If you have seen either of these films or any other Canadian war films, let us know what you think by sending an email to contrazoompod@gmail.com, and I can read your response on the air if you send one in. You can also follow the show on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook @ContraZoomPod. Today's show is presented by Aesthetic Magazine. Thank you to Eric and Kevin Smale for the theme music and Stephanie Pryor for the logo design. If you could rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts, it will be a huge help for us to be able to grow and find new listeners. Thanks for listening.